Thank you.
Yes.
Liz, over to you.
Hi, good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. I'm Liz Human. I'm the executive director at the Alliance for Peace Building. And I know there's a lot going on in the world, and a lot of organizations are hurting. We know conflict is increasing. But we wanted to take a moment today to bring people together and think about some of the successes that have happened and how we can use some of that experience and knowledge to impact the issues that are affecting us wherever you are in the world, both in the global north and the global south. So, um, I am thrilled today to be able to talk with Betsy Small. She's the former executive director of Creating Friendships for Peace, and she's here to discuss her new book, Before, A Story of Discovery and Loss in Sierra Leone. So Betsy first went to Sierra Leone for the Peace Corps, and she was an agricultural volunteer in the country's Diamond District between 1984 and 1987. And then she reconnected with Sierra Leone later, decades later. So this book offers a really unique portrait of Sierra Leone, which we all know has had significant violent conflict and also has come out of it and has some really good examples, I think, and some good lessons learned for all of us. Um, so she really focused on women and girls before the conflict, and later really focuses in on the hunger to forge connections, which we know is a powerful antidote to indifference, intolerance, and even violence. I can't say how important this issue is for all of us today. So let me just tell you a little bit more about Betsy. She's just a lovely human being, but she's besides that, um, as I said, she served in the Peace Corps. She's worked with divided communities in the US and abroad. She holds a master's degree in cross-cultural counseling, psychology, and special education from the Teachers College in Columbia University and North Carolina Central University. She's been an educator, a counselor for families and youth. And she has served as the executive director of War Child USA. And again, more recently, she was at Creating Friendships for Peace, which works with teams of peace builders in Israel, Palestine, Cyprus, and Northern Ireland. So, welcome, Betsy,
Thank you.
and thank you for this book, and thank you for sharing your experience and your wisdom with us today. So, I'm going to start off and ask you give us an introduction to this book. I mean, I think it's clear what inspired you to write it, but give us an insight into that.
Yeah.
Why did you write it? And what's the story that you want us to take out of this?
Thank you. That's a lovely introduction. I think that the epigraph of the book actually tells you the story of why and how and where we are today, which is if you go, you hurt. If you hurt, you feel. And if you feel, you're connected forever. And I actually believe that because the most basic lesson of Sierra Leone um, and anyone who serves in a global South country um, is you come back to America thinking all democracies are fragile. Our Constitution is an idea. It doesn't exist unless we believe it exists. And in Sierra Leone, there's a wonderful saying, if you believe not true, not true. If you think it's true, it's true. And I think amid our current constitutional crisis, if I can say that, um, I think we all have to believe in upholding the rule of law. And I'm actually really thrilled and honored that this book with the University of Michigan Press is in the Law, Meaning, and Violence series. Um, because at the core of what I was trying to do was not just to tell the Peace Corps story from the lens of being an agriculture volunteer 4 years before the so-called Blood Diamond War, but also why it matters. Um, And I think it does matter. And to your question about women and girls, I was assigned to the part of the labor that belonged to the men as a rice agriculture volunteer, teaching farmers how to grow rice in inland valley swamps. And being assigned to the part of the labor that belonged to the men in a country where enslaved Africans from this region were brought to the Carolinas, coastal Georgia, for their rice growing expertise, for their ingenuity, on which arguably America was built on this first early American industry. And my placement exposes a tragedy in a way. And and so um, I think that my relationship with the women in the village and the social cohesion that I experienced in this tiny community on the edge of the Diamond District gave me a real window into the need for all of us to feel like our voices matter. And I think at that time, the women in this community felt like their voices did matter. They were part of it. They were part of the story of the village. They were part of the story of farming, as were the men. And the coherence that was as fragile as any society's um, fell away really quickly. And resentment attaches to really dry brush and can inflame a lot of circumstances that are hard to put back in the bottle once they start.
So, can you give me an example? We all know we remember stories. Can you give
Mhm.
me one story of something that really stuck out to you, um, you know, during that time before or after?
Um, sure. I have a passage picked out, so maybe
Oh,
that would
wonderful.
be good. But I start most of my book talks with I went to Sierra Leone with pre-existing conditions, theirs and mine, and theirs was obviously this legacy of slavery and colonialism. The repatriated Africans who fought on the side of the British were called loyalists and were promised um, freedom and a back to Africa trip. But those Africans who repatriated were Western and um, Protestant, and they had a very different lived experience than the people upcountry in Sierra Leone, and those created fault lines. So um, those kinds of conditions set the stage for a whole lot of events in a society. I would say another pre-existing condition, and then I'll read this passage, is that the inflation rate when I arrived in Sierra Leone was 1.7 to the dollar. By the time I left, actually 2.7 to the dollar. When I left, it was 50 leones to the dollar. And then by the time the war started, it was like 160 leones to the dollar. So, I mean, that tells its own economic story. When in 1984, the Pan African Conference, the Organization of African Unity, met, and the president built um, highways and heads of state village, a huge stadium that still exists today, the country's first traffic light, but it essentially bankrupted the country. So volunteers who predated me had a very different experience of a young nation and being part of Kennedy's, children, as they called it in Sierra Leone, and then those of us who came after. But here's something that maybe answers your question. Where I'm in, every chapter has a moral opposite. So you and I sort of, I mean, I think I learned a lot of critical thinking in a so-called illiterate. I mean, the oral tradition is a form of literacy, um, but I learned a lot of critical thinking and the ability to hold opposites. And I mean, as I've heard you say before, Liz, more than one thing is true at the same time. So, in the spirit of that, um, so I'm in the village. It's evening. The moon is shining. The mommy queen of the village, the first wife of my landlord, who had 4 wives and 30 children, gathered the community children to tell a story. And so the passing down of oral tradition through a moral tale can seem like entertainment to pass the time, but of course it's so much more. So the story is told, and I say to Sa Conde, it's told in the local tribal language, ethnic language, Kono. Um, I asked Sa, can you tell me what that Mama Sia's story had been about? Greed, he said, and then he recounted the tale of a greedy spider who robbed and begged at the door of so many villages that finally everyone decided to play a trick on him and teach him a lesson. 7 different villages cleverly advertised that they were all going to have a celebration. The spider, hearing this, wanted to steal as much food as he could from the celebration, so he enlisted his 7 children's help. He tied 7 long ropes around his middle, one for each child, and instructed each one to tug on the other end of the rope when the party started. But when all the parties began simultaneously, each child gave him a tug, causing so much pain, his middle began to shrivel. And now, because of that day, all tiny spiders have tiny middles, just as their greedy father did. I asked Saw what he thought of the story, the 12-year-old boy who was the son of my best friend. That's why spiders have tiny middles. At 12, he still retained a concrete view of the world. Mama Sia was smart to tell you that story, I said. How did she learn stories? I don't know. Sometime in grandma been tell 'em. Maybe her grandparents passed the story down. I could tell from his answer that the scope of his oral history, the elders' tradition of storytelling in the village, was something Sa didn't see because it had always been there. But then he said, for greedy, no fine. At all, I said, thinking how we celebrate greed in America. A sudden deep voice echoed behind us and said, in no fine at all. And when I turned around, I saw Finda and Bondu Betsy's father, Tamba Charles, approaching. He set his cup of palm wine on the stoop and looked at me. Oh, yeah, we have many spiders inside beautiful Sierra Leone. Tamba called Sa-Konde close to him, reaching in his pocket to offer him a coin. I knew he was rewarding Sa for rehearsing Mama Sia's story. Sa looked pleased and sat taller when he rejoined the children. My grandparents told me many things over and over, so when they died, I would remember, Tamba said. Any shared telling of a story, any memory of an elder should be rewarded. With his tone tightening, he explained by saying, Kapu sense, no kapu word. Seize upon the sense, not the word. Memorizing without understanding is dangerous. Dangerous? Book sense important, what's not one grain. Book knowledge is critical, but reading takes place alone, and one grain like one grain of rice. So there's language that's associated with the farming society. Tamba then challenged me to set aside my books, letters, and pen for a month. He suggested that both knowledge and wisdom were the result of listening closely and remembering, especially the mistakes of others. Bodigodon bonde lef. In the end, we are only our bones, so why wouldn't we tell our stories? Tamba's remark made me aware of how much family history, including my own family's, gets lost before it's passed down. Stories, millions of them, that were meant to be told to the next generation, but got buried instead. And, you know, that's before the war.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Uh, so that was before the war.
Mhm,
Now you went back after the war.
mhm,
What did you see? What resilience did you see?
mhm.
That you can point to as an example.
Well, I went back a few times. My first time was the war had been over for as long as it had lasted, so 12 years after. I saw a village meet me with um, the same energy and enthusiasm and love and the tradition of welcoming strangers that I experienced the first time. What I also saw was houses that no longer existed. They had been burnt to the ground. My house was burnt to the ground. People died within those homes that were burnt to the ground. I saw a lot of 90-yard stares. I saw people wanting to tell their story and struggling to articulate how it felt and what it meant, and also people who didn't want to talk about the story. What didn't change and what was resilient, and sort of speaks to Teresa Betancourt's new book on Into the Light, which is post-traumatic growth, which is in that trauma was also repair and healing and kindness and warmth. And I went back with my daughter, which is part of the story, when she was 15. It was 3 months before the Ebola outbreak, um, which no one saw coming. Um, and some said it was worse than war because it was an enemy you couldn't see. And even within the ethnic language, within Kona, the word for virus doesn't really exist, which makes sense in a place where there's no microscopes, you know. But the hospitality and the sense of community coming together to talk about their problems and what they needed from me, um, how they've been coping, their story, not so much of the war, but what their hopes and dreams for the village were. I mean, it caught me. It caught me off guard. It caught me, um, the will to improve, the will to repair, um, the traditional democratic practice within the community of elders coming together in the town center. And rather than establishing blame, they restore harmony. And I could see the way in which people didn't just extend themselves to me, but reached out to other people to talk collectively about some of the experiences. Um, I can't say that I was struck by resilience as much as I was struck by what war does and the loss of the war, but that going back in subsequent trips, I mean, I got to see the progression of healing, and that is amazing. I mean, that is the human spirit. And the children that I had known, you know, who were 5 and 6 and 10 years old, and when I lived there, were now the leaders of the village. And so, in a way, coming back almost as an auntie, because I knew stories of them when they were little. I had photographs that they would never see of parents who died. Um, and some of the children died at the hands of the villagers that are still gathered among, you know, among each other. So I think the most beautiful part of the whole trip was introducing them to my daughter. And it speaks to why I wrote the book, which is that you can leave and say, bye bye. That was a great experience. I went into the Peace Corps. You tell a few stories when you get back. You have an adjustment. There's a joke in the Peace Corps that for every year you're away, it takes that, you know, that year to return. But actually, I think we have a commitment to the communities that we live in. We have a commitment to know them all our lives. And I feel that commitment, and it's not always easy. And we're coming from very different places, but everything is trying, which is all na try in the Creole language. And I think that for Peace Corps or any humanitarian work, any peace building work, I think the follow up and the continued empathetic connections, not because you're always successful and not because there isn't conflict and figuring out how to manage resources between you, among you, how to speak about hard topics. But because if we don't try, I don't think we have very much. I think we have to try.
So thank you for that. So Sierra Leone is really looked at as an example on reconciliation, building sustainable peace. I happened to sit on a panel with a minister from Sierra Leone a few years ago, and we were talking about some of the issues that were happening in the US. And I said we could have learned a lot from Sierra Leone, and we should be learning a lot from Sierra Leone for how they were able to come through the COVID uh, pandemic.
Mhm.
Uh, so, what do you think? What I don't want to say what makes Sierra Leone special because lots of communities come out of conflict, but not as well as Sierra Leone. What do you think? I mean, the war was brutal.
Or was brutal.
What do you think, both from inside Sierra Leone and also, the international communities work there? What what helped it become, more of a success post-conflict?
So, so I think that the perspective of restoring harmony rather than establishing blame runs a through line in Sierra Leone. I don't think Sierra Leone can take the peace for granted any more than anywhere else, but I think that the traditional culture, of, Fambul Talk, peace building bonfires where reconciliation has taken place. That's a huge, I mean, they have cultural resources to embody their own, inhabit their own healing and repair, regardless of whether the money flows from the US or not. There are, I mean, I think culture is a mental health issue, and cultures do create resilience. And part of what war and domination from other outside forces and internal forces do is erode the resilience of cultures. And that's sort of one of the biggest tragedies, I think, in countries. But I think Sierra Leone has its own reservoir of resilience in its culture. And I think part of that is the hospitality towards strangers. I think it is their traditional um, Bundu and Poro societies. I think it is the coming of age societies for young people. But like I said, like everything works in both directions. It can go either way. And I think Sierra Leoneans suffered so greatly and during the war that, as a friend of mine who ran Benin Home, the child's um, demobilization and Rehabilitation Center for Former Child Soldiers said, if we don't forgive these children, who will in the world? No one will care about these children as much as we do. So I think family ties, family tree bends but doesn't break. Fambotik they bend, but they broke. I think that belief runs a through line also deeply in Sierra Leone. And I think actually, I think as much as anything else, that's a source of resilience and growth.
You mentioned a couple times now kindness and repair,
Mhm.
and harmony. And that doesn't mean that, you just, be civil to each other and forget. But uh, it sounds like you're saying people really, through stories, took time to understand each other, to try to restore, to try to forgive, using kindness. Is that the secret sauce that Sierra Leone has? And how can that be translated?
Well, two things with that question. I would never speak for a Sierra Leoneans. I mean, I think that's like a Sierra Leonean's answer to a question,
Yeah.
and it would be, but from Peace Corps, the idea of, I mean, the book tells the story not of just me in the village and who they were, but it tells you who I am, which Sierra Leoneans don't get a lot of. They know the Peace Corps, the people who come, but they don't know how we live. They don't know our family stories to the same extent that we have a window into theirs. And I think that's what chastened me a little bit in this writing. Like I wanted to capture pre-war Sierra Leone as an ethnographic portrait of what happened. But at the same time, I wanted them to know that the journey they were on and the inquiry they're on with themselves about what happened and why and how, that I also, come from a fragile democracy. I mean, every Peace Corps, every aid worker knows through travel that all democracies are fragile. And so I think that um, I wanted to show the we between us more than their story. And I don't know that I can even answer that completely. Um, I know that Peace Corps is often seen as a rugged experience for young privileged college graduates. I absolutely was privileged. That's one of my pre-existing conditions. Um, Change agents who will endure hardships for a benevolent outcome. I think that is the impulse. But I think its success is that the stereotypes and internalized beliefs that we come with, cultural, economic, racial, um, are- become, I mean, you don't come back the same. You come back completely different. And that change takes a really long time to understand for all of us who work in aid and development and peace building. And we can say we want to listen, but how we listen takes so much time. And even in the writing, there are things that I learned about, a story, a situation that I'm describing, and I can only see it, in the rearview mirror, which is why the enduring connection really matters because there's got to be depth of purpose. Um, and I think expanding the definition of partnerships and mutual respect, a person, a community, um, and bridging these differences, it's slow bake. I mean, and I do think, as you said, Liz, before, like peace building, in societies where women are vocal and have a voice, peace building holds. And I think in Sierra Leone, there is that strong woman's voice. I also think domestic violence is worse um, in some parts of Sierra Leone. And I certainly know in my own experience with, and this is as a friendship model, not necessarily um, a formal peace building in the traditional way. I mean, it's outside agencies um, but a very dear friend is in an abusive relationship. She was a little girl when I met her, and she has a track phone so that she can reach out for help. And yet she'll have another baby, and she'll stay with this partner because, as in America, working in domestic violence, the average time it takes to leave a domestic violence, a partner, intimate violence partner is 7 times. I mean, people have to weigh and measure their options. They have more than themselves to think about. So, that I can't help that directly, that even our friendship, our connection, the resources I could bring to one situation. Aid work is really hard. Peace building is really hard, and it's staying with it consistently over time. And I think that's what's at risk today is consistency is what builds trust, and time builds trust, and context builds trust, inquiry builds trust.
Okay, so I saw a question come up
Okay,
that I'd like to ask, and it was, let's see, it just popped up.
yeah, no,
From Sarah, to what extent were the communities you worked with and grew to know aware of the root causes of the war? And did you, I mean, I don't want to say were the signs there, but were um, did people know these grievances and these issues were there? Were they concerned about them?
that's such a good question. Um, I would say that scholars still debate the root causes of Sierra Leone's war. There isn't really a lot of agreement. Was it the diamonds? Was it the corruption? Was it Western encroachment? Um, was it the ability to the fall of the Soviet Union and the stockpiles of weapons on the open market that could be traded for diamonds and retrofitted for children? Was it that American weapons companies didn't stop the sale of guns, the flow of guns? That um, that conflict diamonds, you can't tell where a diamond is from. You can have all the paperwork, but actually it was a marketing campaign that successfully sold more diamonds during the war. I mean, do Sierra Leoneans know? I think they know that things were happening in a terrible way. And again, as Sierra Leoneans may disagree among each other or have very different lens than I have. But my understanding right now is that um, the the rebel groups, they had trained Gaddafi in Libya and had their green book, and they were disaffected young African men who had a playbook with which to exert radical thought. And they came in as rebel bandits, essentially. And they attacked, and the government didn't have an army. They called Momo a one bullet president. And so they were defenseless. And one attack went unmet, and one unmet attack could lead to another and another and another. And I think getting swept up in the violence is part of the story of Sierra Leone. And some would say that they don't call it a civil war and argue um, profusely that it wasn't a civil war, it was civil chaos. It was just
Mhm.
absolute unabated chaos for 11 years. And there is discussion of, the peace accords in Lomé with Jesse Jackson resulted in Foday Sanko being put in charge of the diamond mines, the rebel leader, Foday Sanko, and also vice president. Everyone knew the peace wouldn't hold. And a year later, January 6th in Freetown became um, just a terrible, terrible, violent um, event. So American foreign policy didn't really understand the on the ground situation, which is why Alliance for Peace Building, U.S. Institute for Peace are such important entities because we have to understand the context in which we're working, and we have to be in a state of continuous learning about that conflict and that situation on the ground, both before, during, and after, because things can change so quickly. Was that a
And
good answer?
no, and we also know how important prevention is. Because once a country or a region has experiences violent conflict, the data tells us within 10 years, it's like 50% more likely to go back to conflict. Once you've already done it, it seems more, easier to do in a sense, or it's an option. So that's why that prevention piece and why I was asking you that question. And
Yeah.
thank you, Sarah. That was a very good question. I
Mhm.
also want to do a shout out to Mark Summers. I forgot you, Mark, put it in the chat. He wrote a book called We the Young Fighters, Pop Culture, Terror, and War in Sierra Leone. And I did a little blurb for it, and it's a phenomenal book as well. I think it hits your point about the chaos and how this war started. So I just want to do a shout out to Mark. And if Mark, if you have a question or want to say something, feel free to post it in the chat.
I want to say a shout out to you too, Mark, because I was at that Zoom and it was wonderful. Thank you.
It really was. It's a really great book. I highly recommend it. Mark, you did raise your hand. Nick, can we hear him?
Yes, let me
Okay.
see if I can allow. Okay, there we go. Okay, Mark, you should be allowed to talk.
Thanks, Nick. Hi, everyone. Congratulations, Betsy.
Oh, thank
What an achievement. It's hats off to you for writing, uh, such an important and personal story about Sierra Leone. It's a country that doesn't get that kind of treatment very often. So
thank you.
it's a major contribution, and I'm sure a lot of Sierra Leoneans are grateful for that kind of person-to-person perspective that you're providing. I just wanted to share something about the war.
Yeah,
I actually, if I may, I think there are some pretty clear reasons why the war started. As you said, the government didn't have an army, and there was something that many people called a crisis of youth,
right.
and also the government was running the leaders of the government were running the government like a business. And you mentioned the diamond mines. And one of the curious things about the RUF is when they came in from Liberia with some of Charles Taylor's own soldiers,
Mhm.
there were all these people in Sierra Leone who wanted to join the rebellion because they hated the government and everything was in free fall and so much corruption and sort of violence, state violence. And the military, Fode Sanko and the boys had no interest in that, and they turned it into a terror-based war from the very beginning. And that point of focusing on terror-based warfare was something that was ignited in
So,
the
Mark,
weeks from the war started. I guess what I wanted to just share was there's to get your thoughts about this. What's happened after the war is there's a lot of very encouraging dimensions that happen in rural villages that you describe and Fumble Talk is involved in. And then there is the majority of young people who went through the war who never went back to these villages
right.
and remained in cities. And
We have
Ibrahim,
300% population increase in Freetown. Yeah.
yeah, and that environment, there's a study by Ibrahim Bangura recently, which is called When Peace Means Nothing. And it talks about, it has findings which broke my heart because they're very much what I found with young people after the war, which is they're still on the margins and nobody wants them around. Um, and I found it striking that how often young men in particular are blamed for the war as if
Mhm.
it's their fault that they were abducted and drugged. So I guess I just wanted to get your thoughts about what I found is this real separation of experience after the war. There's this sort of coming together in rural areas, to generally speaking, which Liz mentioned, and then there's the urban dimension, which is where a kind of a new life is style of life is
Really
come
good point.
forward, which is completely different, and I don't think it's encouraging. So I don't know if there's that bifurcation
Well,
of post-war
yeah,
Sierra Leone. I just wanted to get your thoughts. Thank you very much.
It's a good point. Thanks, Mark.
actually, Mark, I think what you said was wonderful. I think that village life involves grieving losses. Sierra Leone has many customs for grieving. I mean, one of the first things the village shared with me was, to see where they buried their dead and to pay our respects. Um, um, the building that was charred, well, several, but the one cement building that was charred in Tokpombu, families are still living in it. You don't want to disturb the dead. And so trees are growing out of these structures, even years after. I mean, the crumbled remnants of the house I lived in was still, there. It had been after it was set on fire. I think the urban dimension of this war and the ability to grieve children who don't want to go back home, they don't want those memories. They are starting anew. They don't speak their ethnic tongue. I think there are many, many risks that still exist in Sierra Leone. I'm really careful in this story, and actually even in my public presentations of Sierra Leone, to talk about before and the going back and leaving the rest to the reader's inquiry. Because what I hope is it sets the stage for the kind of commentary and questioning that you're asking, Mark. I think countering the narrative of Sierra Leone as the place of Kush, which is now the new drug of choice, and the zombie-like behavior that it results. And they're in the village and they're in the city. It's everywhere. And the government can call a crisis to that circumstance, just like it can to domestic violence and education of women. But the rollout of it and the consistent rollout over time to make an impact has to be more than politics, or as Sierra Leoneans sometimes say, politricks. So I'm really focused on, if you can visualize Sierra Leone intact the way it mostly was in 1984, 1986, and you hear the resentments that were stewing about the mines. For example, a Sierra Leonean would walk into the National Diamond Mining Company and be carded. It's the National Diamond Mining Company, but we, the Peace Corps, other expats, could walk through, and there was a bartender waiting to ask us what we wanted on the house. I mean, it was crazy. It's still crazy. But we have to know, it's the saying, you have to know where you come from to know where you're going. And I think the baseline is continually shifting with every generation, but this captures one baseline before the war. And hopefully in that you can find answers to these questions for yourself. This is why I wrote the book.
There's a great question from Tammy, who said, when you finished your book, what did you expect to feel upon completion versus the reality that the post book had an impact on you? That's a great question.
Oh, that's a wonderful question. Well, what do they say? Art is never finished, it's abandoned. And there is an artistic part to writing this, to tell the story in a very, a certain curated way. I mean, I knew the themes that I wanted to advance. So my opinion is in there, even though you don't always get my opinion directly. It's in the story. I think that I feel complete. Like I completed my Peace Corps service. That's how I feel. And I gave them the best of who I was and who they are. And together we share this story now forever. Like, it's so wonderful. And I'm in touch with the village almost every day, and
Wow.
pieces of the story. They know, some of it they get, some of it people don't get, but I think they feel the love. And in the end, that's what we gave each other and still give each other. And I think that, even the projects, I'll give you one story quickly. When I arrived in the village, they asked me to build a church. And I'm a Jewish girl from a Jewish family. And the volunteer before me had built a mud brick church because the village had asked him to, and a different denomination than his. There was a mud brick church right by my house. And I said, well, don't build churches. That's not what we do. I'm not here for that. I don't really know about this church. And they looked at me like, of course, they don't distinguish between Western churches and Western volunteers. It's all Western money. So we make distinctions that maybe we think everyone knows, but actually they don't. They saw it as the same. And in the end, I did help them with their church. I went to the Methodist church in my hometown, and they passed a plate on a Sunday and wired the money to then Bishop Bangura. And the church roof, metal roof instead of thatch, stood in the village. As a shiny reminder that Peace Corps and foreign aid was on the way and things were going to be better in 1984. And after the war, all the buildings that were burnt, all the homes, mud homes that were burnt, that church is the only thing that was not set on fire in that village. And when so many elders had been killed, because this was mostly a war between the young and the old, and tradition and modernity. I mean, those were the ideological, inflection points. The church was not burned, and on my return, that church became the preschool for mothers and grandmothers to leave the children at, so they could return to their farms. And this is after a 10-year lapse in farming. There's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of clearing to do. There'd never been a preschool in the village. So the thing that I most protested ended up being the most lasting, durable thing that I ever did. I put a roof on a church, and it became the preschool, the foundation of education in this community. So we do unlikely things, and we find ourselves in unlikely situations. And if we're listening and paying attention, maybe we'll go off our own cultural script and lean into this opportunity that maybe doesn't make sense, but maybe, like when your children or, your partner comes to you with an idea, and it like takes risk and trust, and it has to be continually renewed.
Can you tell my husband that?
Yes.
When I start to tell him something, I'm always like, now I want you, don't just say no. I have a lot of crazy
Well,
ideas.
I wrote a quote down that maybe will help, is that we encounter worlds unlike our own, and we find old and outdated systems of domination, broken places of our own past. And then the Ernest Hemingway piece that follows, which is that we let the light into these cracks and find that the healing starts there. And I feel like they took me into all kinds of cracks, all kinds.
So now I want to ask, you've talked a lot about the Peace Corps, and
I
we
have.
know that, a lot of our current agencies and, what has been done before is being looked at, terminated, reformed, funding's been cut. When you look at the Peace Corps, that was started in, I think, the 1960s, right, under Kennedy. It was established at a time, before social media and, lots of travel overseas, et cetera, et cetera. What do you think, do you think Peace Corps should be reformed at all? Do you think, should it stay the same? What are your thoughts on the Peace Corps going forward?
Can I ask everybody to type their answer right into the chat, please? I think that I would not say that everything about the Peace Corps, USAID, any government agency is working beautifully. I don't think that's the nature of what we do. I think it's not even what human beings do. I think there is room for improvement in the Peace Corps, just like there is room for improvement everywhere. And I think that the volunteers of the 60s who rode the wave of the civil rights movement, the volunteers in the 80s when I came in, when Peace Corps was becoming supposedly more professional, the numbers were down. Liberal arts majors were sort of relegated to different jobs than the new professional class that was sort of emerging, and Peace Corps was supposed to enter that realm. Not being that clear. I think that the 80s was one kind of Peace Corps, and then the 90s, today, Peace Corps is in flux. And I thought about this question because you did ask, and I thought it was really good. I think 40% of the countries on the roster for Peace Corps were African countries. I think they were pushing boundaries to fill the ranks. I think that the belief that jobs and training for jobs that supposedly people from African countries didn't have the skill for, Peace Corps was supplanting, and that clearly changed 10 years later. I really think the Peace Corps is a really important voice for America, and primarily because Peace Corps was the first integrated agency within the Department of State. Peace Corps trainings only took place on integrated college campuses. It was so ahead of its time, though very imperfect. And I think that if we care about the racial hierarchy around the world, if we don't meet face to face in the spirit of community-based listening, friendship, skill building together, we risk our status in the world. Soft power still has a meaningful place, I think, in our world. And I think that expanding the definition of Peace Corps to bring forward its original impulse in today's context means the world. I mean, means so much. And I don't think that is going to happen, but I hope I'm wrong.
Any other questions that
Yeah.
that people have? And if not, what do you want to leave us with?
If you go, you hurt. If you hurt, you feel. And if you feel, you're connected forever. We can't
Say that again. Say that again.
If you go, you hurt. If you hurt, you feel. And if you feel, you're connected forever. I mean, I think we need to meet face to face, and I think we need not demonize and misrepresent each other. And I think we bring our baggage with us and we renegotiate it just as other people bring their baggage to us. There's no corner of the world where we don't all impact each other in some way. And I don't think that isolationism creates a better world.
So talk about a message for every country.
Mm-hmm.
Meet face to face, don't demonize each other, and no corner of the world doesn't impact someplace in this interconnected globe. That is a pretty incredible message that countries in the global north also need to hear. So I want to thank you. What an incredible journey you've been on. What incredible message you have, not only for Sierra Leone, your story there, but the message that so many people, countries need to hear right now.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you. Can I add one thing that if anyone wants to visit betsysmall.com, I have a resources page, a links page, and you can learn more about Sierra Leone on that page. There's lots of places to visit. both organizations within Sierra Leone and readings that I think inform, better inform on conversations like these. And feel free to reach out and, ask me questions if you have something you'd like me to put on the link page. I'm happy to do that too, if you're from Sierra Leone or working with Sierra Leone, including your bookmark. So,
And Nick put
oh, thank you, Nick.
put the
Okay.
link in the chat, so please
Yeah.
grab it. I was just trying to see betsysmall.com.
And you can see
/links.
where I'll be. I'll be in Delaware next week, and I'll be at Poets and Prose in June. I'll be at the Gullah Festival in Georgia. So I'll be around. So you can see where I'll be traveling. Maybe I'll meet some of you there.
I just am so grateful, and what a pleasure to talk with you today. And I was taking notes about the meet face to face, don't demonize each other. This is a really important message that I think everyone needed to hear today. So please keep going and keep spreading this message, because it's really needed.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you for the wonderful, amazing work of the Alliance. You guys are really, hold on.
Wow.
We're here for
We
you.
are, we're made up of our amazing members too. So we're grateful for this community as well, that we agree we need now more than ever. So thank you again. Thank you for your amazing work, and we'll see you soon.
See you soon. Thank you.